Good morning, everyone. Today is April 15th. I'm Mr. Sheridan. This is Zoology for today. We are going to continue our presentation on the ruminant digestive system. We did the first half yesterday, everything from the lips and mouth down through the first two chambers of the ruminant stomach, which are the reticulum and the rumen. Today, we are going to jump into a second presentation. The notes section that you have, you should be able to follow along and fill in those blanks as we go. You should have gotten the first 2 pages of that filled out yesterday. Today, we're going to do the last page and a half. For those of you who missed yesterday, for whatever reason, I do have that YouTube video up, and it's in the week 32 instructional videos folder in your Google Classroom. So you can go back and read through that if you are missing any of the notes. But for today, we're going to go ahead and get started and run through our presentation on the second half of the ruminant digestive system. Again, just for a reminder, this presentation comes from the folks at Sam Houston State. I did not put this together. However, it covers the material. I didn't change the wording in this one because you're following along with your notes, which are designed to go along with this particular slideshow. So our objectives for today are to compare the last 2 components of ruminant animals, the omasum and the abomasum, which are the last two components, and then analyze the importance of the small and large intestines for ruminant animals. So we're going to get started. If you'll remember yesterday, we left off with the rumen, which is the largest component of a ruminant stomach. It holds 80% of the content of that animal's stomach. It is on their left side, so when they bloat, you can see it on their left. It's huge. It's a big fermentation vat. Once that material has fermented and started to break down some of that cellulose, it moves into the omasum. The omasum is round and it is very muscular. This is where a lot of our mechanical digestion can take place. So our cellulose or fibrous material that was fermenting in the rumen now moves into the omasum, where it's mechanically ground. So it's going to actually grind the food material and prepare that food material for chemical breakdown, which is going to happen in the abomasum. So it has many folds in the lining and often is said to look like the pages of a book. And we'll see that here in just a minute. Again, we do have pictures of each of these sections. So for those of you who are a little squeamish, just brace yourselves. So it's going to reduce the particle size even more. So now that that particle size is fermented enough where it can be kind of broken down, the omasum is going to grind it to the point where it can be absorbed in the abomasum. And there is some absorption that's going to start here, but most of that's going to take place in our next part of the stomach. So you've got your abomasum here. You can see briefly here, this is kind of what they're talking about with the folds that look like the side of an actual book, if you can see those best right here. But again, this is what this material is looking like after it comes out of the rumen and goes into the omasum, where it is ground into material that the abomasum can use. So now that we've gone through the reticulum, which is the honeycomb part that actually grabs foreign material, then it ferments in the rumen. Then we go to the omasum, which grinds that material. Now we're in the abomasum, which basically all that other stuff just gets it to this point, so that this is the stomach that is most like non-ruminants. So monogastric, this is most like the monogastric stomach, which is like our stomach and that of pigs. So it's very similar to the stomach of non-ruminants. This is where the majority of chemical breakdown of food occurs. So this is where your secretions are going to take place. This is where most of that food material is now broken down into usable parts that in the abomasum we can actually use. So this is what we call the true stomach. This is where absorption is going to take place. It's where chemical digestion is going to take place. And it produces this mucus, very similar to our stomachs, that are lined with the mucus so that they're protected as they are, because that chemical breakdown, there's the acid that actually breaks that food down. So it's obviously very, can be harmful to, most cells. That's why they produce that mucus that lines the stomach, very similar to monogastric animals. So this is where enzyme secretion takes place. Again, we're talking about the abomasum here, and it acts like the monogastric stomach. It produces hydrochloric acid. pepsinogen and pepsin, which are the enzymes that we're talking about that are going to start chemical digestion, that are actually going to break that stuff down. And it also produces lipase in early stages of life. So I'm hoping that you can use context clues. Can anybody tell me what lipase does? What does lipase do? Another hint, we actually would produce lipase in the early stages of our lives as well. While everybody's filling in their notes, I figured somebody would go in the chat. No clue, but thank you for throwing it in there. Any guesses? Jeremiah, Rihanna, Sam, Devin? Any guesses on what lipase does? While we're getting everybody a minute to catch up here.
I legitimately don't know.
Lipase would break down lactose, which is in milk, obviously. So lipase is the chemical that's going to actually break down lactose, so that which is in milk, so that we can actually use that when we are in the early stages of life.
Also, lipase actually breaks down lactose, so we can use it. Actually, use it.
You got it, buddy. You got it. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. So lipase is the magical formula. So as people become lactose intolerant as they get older, it's because they don't have lipase in their stomachs. Okay, so here's the inside view of our abomasum, very similar to a monogastric stomach, but the most important thing to notice here, you can see that there's this nice little glaze, or it looks wet. That's because that's that mucus that lines the inside of the stomach. Very, very acidic in order to break down that material into usable parts for our bodies. So that stomach needs to protect itself. And again, this is the abomasum. Okay, so now we've gone through the we've gone through the mouth, we've gone through the esophagus, we've gone through the reticulum, the rumen, the omasum, and the abomasum. Now we're into, again, this is going to be very similar to our monogastric friends, which would be humans and pigs. And we move into our small intestine, where most of the food material is absorbed into the bloodstream. So now after the mechanical digestion in the omasum and the chemical digestion in the abomasum, now we're moving into the small intestine, which is divided into three sections: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And those are in order. So the duodenum comes first, the jejunum comes second, and the ileum comes third. Let me know if you're struggling at all to get those down. I know they're kind of covered in this bubble the way that they've got this lined up here, so let me know. Okay, so the food materials continually squeeze as it moves through the small intestine so that it's becoming more solid. Food particles are being absorbed, water is being absorbed into the body so that those food particles are becoming more solid, obviously with the goal of only the things that we don't want being extracted. The majority of the food material absorption occurs in the duodenum and the jejunum. If you remember, those are the first two sections of the small intestine. So most of our food material absorption is happening early in the small intestine, right after it comes out of the abomasum, and that is where our most of our material food absorption occurs. Our large intestine is beginning to prepare unused food material for removal from the body. So what do we need to do? Now that we basically have absorbed all the nutrients that we can out of the food material in especially the first part of the small intestine, but even the last part of the small intestine. Now we're in the large intestine, and we're just trying to get the water out. So we need to prepare that food material for removal from the body. So a portion of that large intestine in some animals contains pouches that may contain enzymes for further species-specific digestion. specifically horses and rabbits. Horses and rabbits both have a cecum. Cecum is a special organ that is at the back end of their digestive system, which again is, so horses and rabbits don't have the fermentation process that happens in the rumen and the grinding that happens in the omasum. They just have a regular stomach. So they need the cecum to actually help digest some of that fibrous material because they're eating grass, they're eating hay and that sort of thing. So rabbits will actually, their cecum actually sorts some of that material. And then for those of you may want to brace yourself here, they will actually re-ingest some of their feces in order to continue to digest that material. Horses don't do that, they're too big. But they are also really bad at absorbing all of the nutrients that they get from their food. Then we're going to talk about the colon, which collects the unused food material that is set to be removed from the body. So our colon is kind of the back end of our small intestine. I'm not going to use this term. They decided to, and I left it in because it's part of your notes, but we're going to call this the rectum, which is where that food material is going to end up right before it is extracted. And then we have the anus, which is the opening through which waste is removed. And it is controlled by sphincter muscles, which are very, very important. There's also sphincter muscles on each side that separate all of these organs. So there's going to be sphincters at the bottom of your esophagus, at the end of the stomach. These are going to control whether food are able to move in and out or pass that particular sphincter. So in this case, obviously, this one's pretty important. Your anal sphincter keeps everything inside or lets stuff out when it needs to. Okay, so if anybody needs more time, if you want me to go back to any of these slides, please let me know. But we just went through and compared the last two components of ruminant animals, the last two components of their complex stomach, which is the omasum and the abomasum. We talked about how the omasum is the mechanical digestion part of our digestive system, which is after that food material is fermented in the rumen, the omasum is going to grind it, then it moves it to the true stomach, which is the abomasum, which then can break down that material with chemical digestion, the hydrochloric acid and pepsin, and there was one more that I don't remember, that is going to break down that food material and allow it to be absorbed in the small intestine mostly. But then the large intestine is designed to extract the water that is needed so that what is excreted is as solid as possible. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before we shut this down? Okay.